Hey everybody, today the United States Supreme Court had just held oral arguments on the legality of President Trump's sweeping tariffs. Now, if you couldn't dedicate 2.5 hours of your life to it this morning, I'll tell you what you missed. Now, this case directly ties into every single facet of the firearms industry. You cannot name one single company that has not been affected by these tariffs in one way or another, most of them being affected negatively, as it's causing costs to skyrocket, not only for the manufacturers in terms of raw goods, but for us, the end user, as well, because price increases are passed on to the consumer. First, this case centers on whether President Trump's broad tariffs or import taxes imposed on many U.S. trading partners via executive actions were lawfully grounded in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which I'll say is IEEPA from now on, IEEPA, IEEPA. In February and April of this year, 25, the Trump administration announced two major tariff initiatives, one targeting Canada, China, and Mexico. The other one was dubbed Liberation Day, and tariffs covered almost all U.S. trading partners that the first one didn't cover. Now, lower courts have held that the statute relied upon, again, IEEPA, does not clearly authorize such broad tariffs, with the contention that the tariff power is constitutionally reserved for Congress. The result of the Supreme Court's decision is high stakes here. It could either validate a major component of Trump's trade agenda and the executive power in trade, or sharply constrain it. It also has large economic implications because tariffs raise consumer prices. They affect imports and exports and manufacturing, a whole bunch of things. Now, there are some key legal questions you need to know about as well. Number one, does IEEPA empower the president to impose tariffs on imports, taxes, and duties by declaring a national emergency? That's the first one. The challengers here say no, that the statute does not mention tariffs or duties, and Congress must clearly authorize major economic acts. The government says yes. Under the emergency powers, the president may regulate economic transactions, including via tariffs, especially where foreign policy and national security are involved. Question two, if IEEPA does authorize this, is the statute an unconstitutional delegation of legislative power? Meaning, non-delegation doctrine, would that be in effect here, or the major questions doctrine? And you'll hear more about that in a minute. Now, the major questions doctrine is front and center. It's when an executive branch claims large economic policy authority, the court asks whether Congress spoke clearly. The third question is, what is the nature of the tariff? Are they properly regulatory, as the government contends, or are they essentially a revenue-raising tax, as the challengers argue, which would be squarely in Congress's domain? All right, so what happened in the oral arguments? Well, the hearing has been characterized in several different places as hot, especially when you take in the questions from nearly every single justice that were being lobbed here. They were definitely on top of this. For the government, John Sauer, who's the Solicitor General, argued that the tariffs, while raising revenue, were regulatory in nature, thus within IEEPA. He emphasized the foreign policy as well as the national security context to justify the deference to the executive. Now, the challengers, they are arguing, the plaintiffs were arguing that tariffs are taxes, that they take our dollars from American pockets and deposit them in the U.S. Treasury. And Congress cannot be bypassed this way. They also argued that the statute does not clearly delegate such sweeping authority. Now, some highlights of some questions that I wrote down that came from members of the court. The first was Chief Justice John Roberts. He asked, whether the foreign policy or the trade deficit framing changes the nature of the tariff power, pointing out that tariffs have traditionally been a congressional domain, yet these measures were tied to foreign affairs. It's a good question. It's a really good question. Then came Amy Coney Barrett, who asked why, if tariffs are justified under national security, why so many countries, she mentioned Spain and France specifically, why they were subject to them, because we don't have any problems with them. There's no national security issues with them. And she asked how broad these powers could be. And then Brett Kavanaugh asked a pretty pointed question. He said, why haven't previous presidents used IEEPA to impose tariffs like this if the power is so clear? And that suggested skepticism toward the government's argument. And then came the Second Amendment's biggest defender, Clarence Thomas. And Clarence asked whether the challenger's logic would also apply to embargoes, which are more obviously foreign policy regulation type stuff. But the plaintiff's attorney here, Katyal, I forget how he said his name. He said the distinction lies in tariffs being revenue raising and constitutional history distinguishing taxation. So that's a tax is what they're saying. Now the justices referenced the major questions doctrine repeatedly, pointing to the idea that if a statute grants authority with major economic or political consequences, Congress must be explicit. The government's argument seemed vulnerable on that ground. Now, the overall tone from the bench was skeptical of the government's broad position. Several justices, including the conservative ones, raised concerns about unlimited executive tariff power. For example, Justice Gorsuch suggested this could become a one-way ratchet toward a gradual but continual growth of power in the executive branch. Now, the challengers had more receptive questioning from the justices. Katyal's, the attorney, his arguments about taxation, major questions, and delegation resonated in several questions throughout the oral arguments. Now, the government was on the defensive around how the statute provided a clear basis, especially given the lack of historical precedent of such tariffs under IEEPA. Now, some key takeaways and observations that I made for you. The justices pointed out that while IEEPA has been used for sanctions, currency controls, and other foreign policy tools, it has not been used historically for sweeping tariffs on nearly all imports. The fact that past presidents did not invoke IEEPA for tariffs was used against the government's position, and it sounded like the justices were hedging on that. Now, the idea that Congress must clearly delegate power for major economic decisions was central. That's the major questions doctrine. If Congress intended to let the president impose tariffs via emergency powers, one would expect explicit language referencing tariffs or duties, which the challengers say is missing. Now, the distinction here matters. If the tariffs are essentially taxation, then Congress's Article 1 taxing power is implicated, meaning the president can't do it. Now, the government attempted to characterize them as regulatory, but some justices pushed back on that framing and didn't sound like they were buying that. Now, the government premised its action on the large U.S. trade deficit and asserted a national security interest there because it affects the industrial base, manufacturing, and supply chains, just to name a few. But the challengers countered that a trade deficit per se has existed for decades and does not automatically create an extraordinary threat required under IEEPA. Now, the hearing here, the oral arguments, referenced the real-world effects. Dramatic increase in average U.S. tariff rates. It's reported to have been risen to 17.9% now. And the burdens on businesses. The possibility of refunds if tariffs are struck down, and ripple effects on American households. This case here is a major test of executive trade power. Does the President of the United States have near free reign under emergency authorities, or are there meaningful limits? And while the court did not signal a definitive ruling today, The skepticism suggests that the government's position might be under some serious strain here. They might be in trouble with this one. Now, many analysts that I read after the oral arguments ended, many of these analysts believe the court might limit the president's tariff power or require clearer congressional authorization or authority. Now, the decision could come right away in a day or two, or it could go for a while, because we know Supreme Court cases, if they're high profile, often come out in the spring or the summer. And this is a pretty high profile case, but I don't see them letting this drag out. They'll probably give us something sooner than later, because tariffs are in effect every single day. Now, I'll give you a little glimpse into my personal experience with these tariffs, and just how it affects a small business owner. They're crushing us. They are crushing us. And we at Blackout Coffee Company, our business is something that it deals with a commodity that is not grown in America to the amount that this would satisfy the demand in America. Coffee beans, we don't have the climate for it. Yeah, you can grow a small amount in Hawaii, but it's not even close to being 0.1% of what you would need to satisfy the demand of every American. So to be hit with a tariff, and the tariffs are designed so that the industry moves back to the country, right? So that we can be self-sufficient. You can't move coffee to America. We just don't have the climate for it. So in my case, I don't think tariffs should apply, but they do. I've talked to, we'll bring it into the Second Amendment world, the firearms industry. I've talked to many owners and employees of firearms companies, and it's crushing people, man. Some of the smaller ones, some of the smaller companies have already gone out of business. And I know some companies have not sent a single product to America since the tariffs were announced, and they're not going to for a while. And one company I just spoke to via text the other day, didn't even know this case was going to happen today. They're going to send some stuff in 26, but the cost for the item is going to be higher than what it was before the tariffs, because it's going to be passed on to us. So let me know what you guys and gals think down below. Are you for or against the tariffs? I mean, they've been chugging along, and I don't think that they've had the knee-jerk reaction that Donald Trump thought they would with some of these some of these countries, where he thought they would acquiesce immediately. And as a result, he's had to hold the line to not appear like, like he lost, I guess, for lack of a better term. But in the aftermath, it's affecting all American small businesses, all of us. So let me know what you think down below. I'd be interested to see what you guys think. If you are an employee of a business rather than a business owner, how is it affecting you? Is it affecting you? And for the other business owners out there, how is it affecting your business? You don't have to give me, like name and how much it's affecting you on the dollars and cents of the business, but are you feeling the pinch? We are. I can tell you we are, like we never have before. And it's because of no decision or nothing we've done. It's just because the numbers that are being put on the other countries, and then all of the shipping companies, the shipping lanes, they're jacking up prices because they know they got you, America, because they know they got you. And that's just a game that is affecting many aspects of business for this country. Appreciate y'all. Hopefully that's a good little wrap up for you. Now you know what happened today at the Supreme Court on the tariffs case for President Trump. Sound off below. I love you. Subscribe to the channel if you love this stuff. Let me know. I'll try to keep you in the loop on more things that happen that affect government, especially as it affects our rights. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.